Last week, PFF Sam Monson joined the show and called Bijan Robinson a generational talent at running back. Should the Bengals draft him if he's available in the first round with the depth at running back? We'll get into that conversation and more.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, joined by your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage of your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So if you're new to the show, hit subscribe on YouTube and join the growing number of Bengals fans that are subscribing to us there. Hit the follow button anywhere you get your podcast. Either way, you can join the First Listen Club, which again, thousands of others of Bengals fans in that club. And this week's going to be fun, James. We've got the Combine coming up. We've got a free agency roundtable coming up with a 4-person show. Going to have a couple guests at once. That might stretch over 2 episodes. Don't be surprised if it does.
Including a Joe. Is it Joe Burrow? Stay tuned for details.
I wonder, what are the odds? He deadpanned into the camera. Anyway, we've got the coaches for the Cincinnati Bengals talking at the Combine this week. We've got the annual Duke Tobin podium at the Combine this week, so some content sure to come out of that as well, in addition to some freaky test numbers, probably. And we'll talk about some of those fun potential testers.
Cincinnati boys can run.
Yeah, that's true.
My man T. Scott about the.
You think he's going to do it?
I hope he does. Well, I honestly, part of me hopes he does. The other part of me hopes Tyler Scott runs a 4.32 and falls to the third round of the Bengals. So it's really tough to say either way, right? But it doesn't feel like he's going to make it that far. So yeah, what the hell? I hope he does. Speaking
of guys that don't feel like they're going to make it that far, let's talk about Bijan Robinson.
Oh,
how's that transition?
Great.
Bijan Robinson is very, very unlikely to be available when the Bengals pick, but
wait, Jake, he's a running back. Running backs, you shouldn't take him in the first round. He might be there in round 7. What are you talking about?
You got to take a tackle no matter what. That's a NFL. What's that movie called? Draft Day? Yeah. That's a terrible movie, by the way.
Oh,
we're way off.
It was awesome. It was amazing. What are you talking
There are people
about?
that watch it every year as a ritual before the draft.
Yep.
It's so bad.
I watched it on 2 different flights this year, like half the movie during a flight and then the other half during a flight. Hey, man. If you think that's wild, imagine me at GM. All right, let's get into Bijan Robinson.
The team would be made of only receivers.
And we'd score a lot of points, baby.
All right. Bijan
All
Robinson.
right, so
go.
Yeah, Bijan Robinson. Let's talk about it because there's a lot of people in Cincinnati or Bengals fans across the country that say running back, no way. This team needs offensive line depth. Of course it does. And it needs offensive line help, no doubt. They say tight end, or maybe they just default to running back. First round doesn't mix. There's also people that say, oh, well, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl with the seventh round rookie. That's dumb. Let's start there. Chris Evans, what round was he drafted in? 6. Okay. And I know he's still part of the team. There's a YouTube commenter that keeps reminding me. Travion Williams, when was he drafted? 6th round? Oh, okay. A lot of the Bengals running backs in the 6th and 7th round, they haven't worked historically. The Bengals have been very good at finding running backs in the 2nd round. That's usually their sweet spot. So if you want to say that, Corey Dillon, 2nd rounder, right? Joe Mixon, 2nd rounder. Jeremy Hill, I get it, was bad for a bit, but was good at the start as a rookie, 2nd rounder. Gio Bernard, 2nd rounder. I don't think that the Bengals are going to find and maybe they will, find their franchise running back in the 7th round just because the Chiefs did it that one time.
It's really hard. I mean, you look at hit rates, like many positions, you get late in day 3, it is pretty hard to find a running back. Although, to be honest, James, I have sometimes wondered. I've played the what-if game with Travion Williams a little bit if he hadn't had those fumbles, which I think really removed some confidence from the coaches with him because he has been productive when he's been on the field. In the few opportunities he's had, they've kept him around. Obviously,
and I didn't mean he was a bust or Chris Evans is a bust either. I just don't think that they're the bell cow running back the 3-down guy, even the 200 touch a year guy. Clearly the coaching staff doesn't feel that about either guy at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, Bijan Robinson is a totally different animal, right? He's adding something to your offense that you don't have. And the one thing that he doesn't do is like the long speed of a Derrick Henry or an Adrian Peterson isn't there. But everything else, he's doing at a really high level.
He could still run a sub 4.4. I mean, there's some talk at that, certainly in the 4.4s.
I just think like the top end speed isn't necessarily like at that, world class, 1% of the 1%. It's still really good.
Yeah.
But you're nitpicking with him no matter what. Right. And so like that's what that is. There is a question about more than anything, the positional value in a draft that's deep at running back. And that's the challenge with this conversation is you never can really say in a vacuum, would you draft Bijan Robinson when the Bengals pick in the first round? Because the answer is probably yes in a specific set of circumstances. And that specific set of circumstances is probably pretty broad because of the caliber of player he is. And this is something that we talked about with Sam. When you talk about a running back in the first round that's as good as Bijan Robinson is as a prospect, if you're talking late 20s, that positional value is kind of baked in a little bit at that point. I think that the other side of that is something like what we talked about with Mike McGlinchey last week, where there's this opportunity cost. Your next pick isn't until 60. And now any hope of getting, that tier of player, that first round tier of player at a more valuable position than running back kind of disappears. And that's what you have to weigh against the level of prospect that is Bijan Robinson. And then you have to decide, well, are the Bengals going to keep Joe Mixon around? Because history would say yes. And I think that's a pretty big complicating factor.
Well, if he's a generational talent, he'll take Joe Mixon's spot tomorrow. That's the part of this where it's different. Joe Mixon isn't a generational talent.
If the Bengals would do that, and would they? I don't know.
I think if Robinson went out there and balled out, sure. If it showed that he was the better back than Mixon. But yes, to your point, Jeremy Hill played out his rookie deal despite, Mixon was it? Yeah, Mixon was around with Hill for a year in 2017. And that felt weird at the time. Now, it was a rookie contract, not a huge cap number. But that's one that you look at and you're like, okay, well, will they go that route or would they move on from Mixon? I think just going back to the 28th pick, if Bijan Robinson's there, it's hard to see a scenario where he isn't the top player on the Bengals board as of today. Pre-combine, who knows what else happens. This changes. It's always fluid. That's the first part. Maybe he doesn't make it there, but if he does, I think he would be ahead of Michael Mayer on their board. I think he would be ahead of probably most of the tight ends that were available. I think a tight end or two will get picked, but before that 28th spot, especially if it's the scenario where Robinson's still available. But you're right. You do have to weigh the opportunity cost. And that's why, to me, you have to make sure you have that right tackle position, some type of stopgap there. Because if a generational talent falls to you, and this isn't just a Bijan Robinson conversation, if he's there at 28 and you have a top 10 grade on him, well, you're probably going to say he's the top player on your board by far. What if Jackson Smith-Njigba's there at 28? To me, it's the same. I view it in the same light. And I get wide receivers more valuable. You made the joke about me. I love wide receivers. I think about them all the time. Sure. But if you can get a guy that's way higher on your board at 28 and can maybe take your offense to the next level, then I think you do it. And so that's where I'm at with Robinson. But of course, you need to address the trenches again. But before it feels like a realistic pick, even if he were there and you knew he was going to be available on draft night, which obviously we don't know.
I think it's highly doubtful. I think that the running back that you're probably considering at that point is Jahmyr Gibbs, and you're probably not as excited about using a first-round pick on Jahmyr Gibbs for all the exciting things he does.
He is exciting.
he's a very fun player. I like him as a prospect quite a bit. It's not as compelling to me as Bijan Robinson in the first round. And people know how I feel about running back value. I mean, that's the other part of this that's always going to be hard for me. I think he's a fantastic prospect. I wouldn't be upset if the Bengals landed him. Obviously, I think it would be something that would improve the team. I mean, we'll see how free agency goes too. But second contracts for running backs are bad. And it's the unfortunate nature of the NFL right now where that position is what it is. And I don't think it's fair to those players. But, on the other hand, you talk about like a tight end alternative, James. You mentioned Michael Mayer. And a lot of times you see tight ends need years to get, to that level. It takes some time. So there's always a balancing act. And these are some of the positions we're talking about for the Bengals in the first round. So let's keep the conversation going coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season, well, they've reached the final quarter of the regular season as LeBron and the Lakers try to make a playoff push. And did you see Klay Thompson go off the other night? Well, FanDuel is where you need to go right now and download America's #1 sports book. Download the app today for a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, you can combine your bets for a chance at an even bigger payout with the same game parlay, maybe number of Klay Thompson threes combined with the over and LeBron James points. That's just one of many options that you can do and use with FanDuel. And it's not just NBA, whether you want to wager on fights, whether you want to wager on NFL draft, so much more. FanDuel, get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 today by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Now, it's very possible when we look at this draft and the Bengals are picking in the first round that Michael Mayer has been picked. That
Real quick,
Bijan
before
Robinson
we do tight end contracts or tight end, can I do one thing on the second contract part of it? Just a point that I want to throw out there, and I don't want to forget it. To me, how much does that matter?
It doesn't.
It's just because you got to hit the pick first, right? So you'd have the fifth-year option. So
which is expensive, but yes, I just make that point because that's like 1% of the decision to me. It's super insignificant, but it's always something that's in the back of my mind when it's running back value. Like, you're going to use this premium resource on a first round pick, and you always want your first round pick to play a second contract for your team and be a big contributor to your team. And the Bengals would give a first round running back a second contract if he was productive and wasn't showing signs of falling off. They just did it with Joe Mixon, a second round running back. I think they would give that contract out. I think it's bad to give those contracts out. I think it's not a good allocation of resources. And that is just a small bit that I struggle with when you talk about using a first round pick on a running back.
Well, that's the argument against them drafting a guard in the first round too, right? Is because historically they just won't. They won't go that route. Eric Steinbach in the early 2000s, or mid 2000s.
It's the other side of the coin. Like, they won't extend their guards.
Yep.
But they will extend their running back. And then now you've got $10 million locked up in a running back that you could use to do XYZ thing.
10 million in 5 years is going to be great. It's going to be a steal for
it'll be like 18, 25. Yeah, it'll be... Like, look at the top running back deals. That's what, and add like 20%. That's what the extension looks like for.
Sure. Anyways, yeah, let's dive into these tight ends though, because I will say this. So we both agree, running back, tight end, you want to address them this offseason. Those are needs. I think the class is deep at both spots and that they can find guys that can contribute, hopefully sooner rather than later at tight end at least.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be shocking if they take a tight end in the first round.
Would not be.
I mean,
nope.
There's this whole idea that even if they bring back Hayden Hurst, say, maybe they even bring back Drew Sample too, and they combine for a $4 million cap hit because somehow they're both very cheap. The market doesn't materialize for Hayden Hurst with all the tight end free agents, with all the tight ends in the draft. Maybe Drew Sample coming off the injury never really got going. They want to have him as a veteran who they obviously like. They like Drew Sample. I would be surprised. I think mildly surprised if both are back. Actually, maybe very surprised if both are back. But anyway, even if they do all that, And Michael Mayer or Darnell Washington, those are the two guys that I'm kind of focused on at this point, are available. Well, because they can block. And they can also do the other things that you need for a tight end. Michael Mayer, very refined, right? Like he should come in and be a guy who can contribute from the beginning, the way TJ Hawkinson, who wasn't fantastic, but was able to play in the NFL from the start of his career, was with the Lions.
And if TJ Hawkinson had Joe Burrow, and I get it, Matt Stafford
could have been different.
Would have been different. Yeah, he'd have put up big numbers, I think. Yeah.
And so, like, he's a guy that you think hits the ground running. Maybe not the elite athlete, but a very good prospect, a very complete prospect. And Darnell Washington needs some refinement to his game, but is a freak, absolute freak. 280 pounds, right? Is going to be like all the extra tackle stuff. You just go to 12 personnel. You just put two tight ends on the field. Darnell Washington is your extra tackle because that's how he plays. And I'm sure he's not like quite as good, right, as some of the extra tackle options are around the NFL, but he's a really good, really willing, really physical run blocker.
He's lighter on his feet though, right? And he can get out there and get ahead of the play faster. And that's what you want in that extra tackle spot a lot of the time.
And there's just a big strategic element of 12 personnel. A team that has lived in 11, 3 wide receivers for the last 3 years. Being able to go out there with 2 tight ends who are actual receiving threats, and one of whom, assuming Hayden Hurst, right? One of whom is a really good blocker. The other one is, fine, average for tight end, probably Hayden Hurst, maybe a little bit below average as a blocker, but willing, certainly. I just think that gives you an element that's hard to defend. Again, you're forcing teams to respect the running game a little bit more in that position. And you've got guys that can actually catch the ball at those spots too. So adding that wrinkle is pretty enticing to me. And that's why I'm looking at those guys instead of the more athletic, move receiving types.
Sure. I get it. I understand it. And I think, could you see them? It depends. I think that's where the Hurst free agency part does impact it some. But I don't think it matters. I don't think the Bengals are going to say, oh, we signed Hayden Hurst, we're not taking a tight end in the first round. Yeah. I think that they would say, all right, well, we have Hurst. What fits which guys make the most sense and can develop into being our tight end one of the future. And maybe Michael Mayer just is it from the jump and it's just this contested catch machine that is, a red zone threat and all of those things. Fine. But I think that those are the two guys that would fit and make sense in that arena. So if the Bengals re-sign Hayden Hurst, let's say they do it this week, that does not rule out one bit, and we might as well just put it on record now, rule out tight end at 28. I think that they could certainly still take a tight end at 28 because, one, you're right, they value the blocking element of it, and there aren't many tight ends that can run and block and catch and do everything that the Bengals want them to do. And so it's a deep class. Would not shock me if they ended up with 1, even 2 tight ends in this draft and they go Hurst and a couple of rookies. That would not shock me if they did that on the active roster. And
I don't necessarily think that for what it's worth, like Darnell Washington may or may not be a first round pick right now. It could be second round. Somebody could just be like, he's 60. A freak. I'm just going to take him in the first round or early.
Bijan 28, Washington 60. Oh,
that'd be so fun.
Because then it unlocks the run game and it's a trench pick and all of those things you just said. And you have this explosive.
And they've signed like Jermaine Illuminor in free agency. So they have.
Look at this free agency plan coming together.
Tackle.
34 points per game.
All this talk about these skill guys, and it wouldn't shock me at all if the Bengals turn around and draft, I don't know, Andre Carter or Will McDonald or Mazzy Smith, one of these defensive linemen, or an offensive tackle. Wouldn't rule
Andre Carter at 28?
Maybe. He's 6'7", James.
It's tough. We'll have to see because a lot's going to change. That's what's hard about it. 6'7". Okay.
They like those tall guys.
Yeah, they do. You're right. Okay, I see your point. Yeah, they do.
Michael Johnson.
I know it.
Carlos Dunlap.
Mid-round.
They could get, if they
second, third round.
7 foot edge rusher that would do it. We'll see. A lot's going to change
Yeah.
with the combine.
Yeah, we will see. A lot will change. Let's
You got a
switch
game for
gears.
us to play?
Yeah, let's switch gears. Let's talk about free agency. And there's some smoke, some free agent smoke, some trade smoke around three big name veterans. And so let's either stoke the flames or put out the fire. We'll do that next. Jalen Ramsey, Bobby Wagner, Taylor Lewan. If you had to sign one, cut one, and retire one, and we'll just use those numbers versus or that phrasing versus what we should use. Which one would you do for each guy?
Maybe you can get a Riley Reef deal for Taylor Lewan. And if you could do that, and he switches positions like Riley Reef, then that's where you would consider Taylor Lewan. I think the other two guys, though, there's no shot. I know we have people circulating graphics with the Bengals as the top landing spot for Bobby Wagner, with the Bengals as the top landing spot for Jalen Ramsey, like you mentioned. Jalen Ramsey is set to have cap hits over $24 million the next 3 years. And he wants an extension in his 30s. What part of that sounds like something the Bengals would do? Like, it's so far from the realm of possibility to me that they would go after Jalen Ramsey because of his cap number, because he wants extended years. I'm assuming with guarantees for the next couple of years and less guarantees, obviously, into his late 30s. But it just seems so anti-Bengals. And I'm sure the cap number is actually different if he were to be traded, because I'm sure a lot of that is signing bonus money. But it just does not seem like something the Bengals would be interested in doing. It's taking on that contract and extending Jalen Ramsey into his 30s. Yeah. And then Bobby Wagner. I would love to have Bobby Wagner on the Cincinnati Bengals. And I guess there's a world where, he takes a 2-year deal before all those extensions kick in. But if you're going to go try to sign Bobby Wagner, you've got Logan Wilson coming up for an extension. You've got Jermaine Pratt as a free agent. And I do think Bobby Wagner's still probably better than Jermaine Pratt, who I also think is good. It's just a lot of money for linebacker. Same conversation we had about extending Pratt and Logan Wilson. It's just a lot of money at that linebacker spot.
Yeah, if I had to rank the likelihood, I think I agree with you. Lewan, the only reason I give him any type of chance is if he's just out there, the market doesn't work for him, and teams pass on him, and the Bengals are like, well, could he play right tackle and just go that route and give him a 1-year prove it type deal? But they don't like guys my age, or your age. They just don't. Look at the roster. And Taylor Lewan's like 2 weeks older than me. And if you're on the wrong side of 30, that's just not what they're doing right now.
You can join the coaching staff.
No doubt, right? Jalen Ramsey is going to be on the wrong side of 30 soon. And so they would look at that and say, are we really paying big money for a corner that's played a ton of snaps, that appears to have lost at least a half step, and is not a lockdown man corner anymore, even though he's pretty good in zone still and can still be really good, I'd say, with Lou Anarumo. I think he'd be a good player on the Bengals if everything was equal and he just took Eli Apple's spot, essentially. But you're not doing that money-wise. And then Bobby Wagner, I think he's going to have a big market. The only way it would make sense to me is if he was like, all right, where can I win? Pratt signs a big deal elsewhere, and there's just this obvious void in the middle of the Bengals, linebacker room. And he's like, you know what? I'll take a 1-year, some kind of crazy cheap deal to go play with Joe Burrow and company. It's just so unrealistic. So I honestly, I'm cutting all three. I don't think any of them are realistic. If there's one that could happen, it would be Taylor Lewan, but I think it's just so off their radar, or not even off their radar. They've probably already had a conversation and dismissed it, even though he did say that the Bengals need a left tackle, which I think half of our audience probably agrees with. And then the other half realizes Jonah Williams is on his 5th-year option. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you'd move Jonah Williams to right tackle, and you say, oh, well, if Lewan gets hurt, you can move him back to left tackle. You just hope Lewan gets you to halfway through the year when Collins is ready. I don't know. That would be a lot of money to spend on tackle. I don't see it happening.
And a lot of moving pieces, and they haven't moved Jonah given an opportunity to do so in the past. Yeah. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Jonah Williams is the left tackle for the Bengals unless they shock us and find a trade partner and have then you need 2 tackles all of a sudden. It seems like you're creating a problem for yourself. But
Michael Mayer or Bijan Robinson. At
what have they done? What have they done before that?
Oh, let's sign Taylor Lewan.
That's it.
There you go.
Joe Mixon.
Oh, and Hayden Hurst. Joe Mixon has taken a pay cut and has no cap issues next year if they cut him. There's no dead money.
Probably Bijan.
Okay. I was just curious.
I think that it's close because you're losing 1 year of that rookie running back value if Joe Mixon is still on the team. At least some of it.
Yeah. And the wild part is I've seen comments say, or certainly tweets, just trade Joe. There's no trade value. Not with that contract. There's none. No. You'd have to eat some of the money and you'd get such a low pick, it wouldn't be worth it.
No. There's a reason. Christian McCaffrey was tradable with his contract. Somehow. I'm surprised. But
best running back in the game is part of it.
He's been so hurt is why
he was great.
Surprised. He is good.
He's so good.
And it's a great fit for him in the San Francisco offense, obviously. But Mixon is not McCaffrey.
Mm-mm.
So I mean there's not much of a trade market there. The only tradable asset for the Bengals. Well, T. Higgins is obviously an asset, but they're not going to trade him. Sure. But the other one that comes to mind is Tyler Boyd that we've talked about Tyler Boyd, and I don't think they have any interest in trading any of those guys. That's just not part of their DNA. They don't trade players who they think can help them win.
Especially, by the way, if you're just getting let's say a 4th rounder for Boyd, that doesn't make you better this year.
No.
You already have a 4th round pick. Find the receiver there and get your 4th, because that's a need as a 4th receiver. So if you lose your 3rd receiver, now it's opening up 2 holes. And unless you're taking one of these pass catch first tight ends, then that means you're going to have to take a receiver in a bad wide receiver class. And that's really what it is. That's why I don't think Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be there. I think he'll probably go earlier than 28.
There are some very fun slot only type receivers in this class, though. It's a good year to get a guy to play slot. The thing about the Bengals is they like to move Boyd around. He's not a slot only. He's best in the slot, but he's not a slot only guy. And some of the guys in this class are more the slot only because they're 5'8", really shifty. But they're fun players.
We'll see this week.
We will. We got combine content coming your way this week. We've got a free agency roundtable with Mike Santagata and Joe Goodberry. Spoilers for those of you who were
not Burrow? Oh, what the heck?
Yeah,
I was told it was Burrow, Joe Goodberry.
Much to the disappointment of James Rapien. That's coming your way later this week. Until then, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.